Hello, we're on.
Hello.
Okay, let's start by uh, talking about your early life, where you were born, how old you were when you were born. Only kidding, of course. Hopefully you were around 9 months old.
Well, I suppose so.
Or no month.
Who knows?
And where you were born and life in those early years, which you remember, and then going to school and changing schools, life on the farm, life in the town, and so forth. So just start with where you were born.
Well, I was born in a rural home, I suppose about 1.5 miles from the town of Goldfield. And I don't remember that home at all, because when I was about either 2 or 4, we moved across a section to another farm. And that's the home. That's the home that I remember. Ever since then. I went through, lived it there till I went through high school, went on to college. And that was my home all those years. No change of schools from first grade through 12th grade in the same school. Didn't have kindergartens in our school then.
Did you have all grades in one room or many grades in one room?
2 grades in the grade school rooms. 2 grades in each of the rooms. And then the high school was upstairs. And in fact, the junior high, 7th and 8th grade, was upstairs. Our junior high then was 7th, 8th, and 9th.
You said the town was
Goldfield,
Goldfield.
Iowa.
How many in the town?
Oh, between 500 and 700. We knew about everybody in town.
How far away from town were you?
As I was growing up, about 1 mile, maybe a little more than 1 mile.
How did you get to school?
Well, when the weather was good, we walked.
1 mile?
Yes.
Probably take you half an hour?
I have no recollection of how long it took.
And when the weather was not so good?
Well, we had sometimes buggy. Hal, my older brother, and Blanche would drive this buggy with a 1-horse buggy.
They were in school still, though.
They were still in school.
What do you do with the horses once they get to school?
I think there was a barn. They put them in a barn. I think they must not have done that too much, but I think there was a barn somewhere around where they...
And somebody would look after the animals, you suppose?
I have no knowledge of that. In fact, I hadn't thought about it. And of course, when I got into high school, we had a car then. And in inclement weather, we would drive this little Ford, I guess it was. And I do remember in connection with that, when I was in the lower grade school, that quite often Hal would have to stay for athletic practice, and we'd have to wait around till he came home. And maybe didn't walk too much when I was younger. I can't remember that, but and I remember this store, downtown grocery store, used to have to wait in sometimes while he was having. There were people everybody knew. In fact, these people were in our church, and my cousins from across the field would sometimes they'd wait with them.
What kind of athletics was Hal?
Basketball, that is what I remember.
That's what he loved?
Yes.
He was on a team?
Yes. And they'd have their county meets, and he'd play in that.
This was in high school?
Yeah, when he was in high school.
How much older was he than you?
Hal was almost 7 years older.
How was Blanche is the oldest?
Yes, she was not quite 9 years older.
And then Hal came.
And Hal.
Then you.
Well, there was a little girl, Prudence Arma, who died when she was 6 weeks old with pneumonia.
Oh.
And then,
That was after Hal?
yes.
And then you?
And then 2 years after that, I came along. And then Lincoln.
So, you were living on the farm all throughout high school?
Yes.
And then after high school?
Well, I should say that we weren't farming that farm all this time.
No.
Because my father was ill.
With?
See, I was born in 1907. He died in 1914.
Right. And he was ill with?
What now would be called Hodgkin's disease. That's no, I beg your pardon, not Hodgkin's, Parkinson's. Where he couldn't control his muscles very well. Mother had to feed him eventually, I remember. But he was always mentally okay and cheerful.
But it was something like pneumonia that took him?
No, they didn't. They called it, then called it creeping palsy.
He couldn't get enough nutrition? What was
No, his nerves, I suppose, because it causes him to shake. And he couldn't walk at the last.
He died at home?
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes. I remember the morning after. I was sleeping and Blanche came upstairs and was combing her hair. I still can see that. And she just told me when I woke up that Papa had died. And of course, I was moved by that. And she just commented, well, it was better.
She was about 16 years old then. Mm-hmm. You were about 7.
Mm-hmm.
And did you emotionally react to that, or were you too young to really understand it?
Yes, I did it right then, because that's why she was trying to comfort me.
How well did you know your father at that age?
Actually, I suppose not too well.
He had been ill for some years.
About 4 years.
So you were,
yes.
not able to...
I didn't really know him as a well man,
No.
but he had been a very hard worker. And
On the farm?
yes. And at that time, some people said he worked too hard. Now, whether that caused it, I don't know. But I remember sitting on his lap, and he would read to me out of what then was famously called, became famous, the Sweet Pea Reader. He would read to me, and I remember another connection with him when we had a kind of a cyclone or tornado, and I was frightened, of course, and sitting on his lap, and he comforted me in that way. And I remember seeing an apple tree blow down and roll over a fence. I also remember Mother used to take him for buggy rides to give him a change of scene. And I remember begging to go along once, so they finally let me go along, and I think I rode down in it was a two-seated buggy, with a canopy over the top. I rode down in the front, sat down in front of the dashboard. I remember that. And then the other part that I remember, I was kind of shy when he was toward the last, I guess. And he was in a downstairs bedroom. And
Who was shy?
I was shy about his illness, I guess.
Oh.
And I remember of his calling to me and said, "Hello, Evie," very quietly because his voice was low. But for some reason I was too shy to go in, and I've always thought about that afterwards. Why I wished I had gone in to him then. And also remember going to school. And I don't know how soon this was, but I didn't want to go to school one day because he was very sick. And I remember Mother said, "Well, we'll let you know. If anything happens."
Mm-hmm. But you said that you weren't on the farm all throughout the years in high school because of the depression and...
No, we stayed on the farm. My uncle and his two sons across the field then would rented our farm from us, so we could still live in the house. And
there was too much work to do.
well, for Hal wasn't old enough yet to take it over. And then after a while, Hal, then the war was coming on, First World War One, and the boys, the Zinsser boys, thought they were going to have to go to war. In fact, one of them had been called, and so because of that, we were going to have to really rent our farm up to someone else. So we did, and
because of the lack of labor.
yes, because that family couldn't handle both farms. So that was the year that we moved to town, to Goldfield. I was in
1 year.
I think it was a year and a half or so. I was in junior high then. I thought that would be great to live in town for a change, and have the sidewalks and walk to school. But when we were making the move, or afterward, I found out we couldn't have a dog there, and we didn't have any apple tree.
You couldn't have a dog because of the
Well,
rules
because
of
we
renting the
at that
house? Or it just wasn't practical.
At that time we didn't have house dogs, and so it wasn't a
People in general didn't have
no.
dogs.
People in general didn't, and so that kind of dampened my spirits for a little while.
Why, were you attached to a dog?
Oh yes.
You were?
Oh yes, I loved the dogs on the farm.
How many did you have?
Oh, several during the years we were there.
Is that right? I didn't know you were so attached to them.
Oh yes, good friends with dogs. They were bigger dogs, of course,
Yeah.
like a collie.
So what became of them?
Oh, I can sort of remember when one of them was run over with a car, right in front of the house.
Well, I thought you couldn't take them because on the farm.
On the farm, I'm talking about.
But they were just left to the farm.
Yes,
So
right.
That must have been heartbreaking for a child.
Well, sort of, but junior high age, you get over it fast. You have to accept it. And then we were in the town only about, as I recall, about a year and a half. And this was about in the era of 1919. And then the war was over. In fact, my cousin, who his number had been called or whatever, didn't ever have to go. So then Hal was of age, and he didn't have a career as such. And incidentally, during that time while we lived in town, I remember he worked on a train for a while as a selling papers and candy and stuff up and down the aisles. But then he decided that he would like to farm. So at that time, we went back to the farm and practically had to mortgage our farm for him to buy equipment to farm. Our farm was pretty well paid for at that time. Papa had worked so hard, and my father and mother, after they were married, came out to Iowa, and they weren't pioneers, but not so many settlers out there. So.
But you said they had to buy equipment for the farm.
Well, because we had sold it, I guess, when we moved to the town, and then they were farming with better, heavier equipment at that time. So then we lived out on the farm until I was through high school. And
do you remember your feelings of coming back to the farm again?
Not too much so, no. But I think I don't have any feelings of not wanting to.
But that meant more hard work for you, didn't it, back on the farm?
Well, yes, I suppose so.
And that was last year of high school, or?
No, that was when I was in junior high.
Junior high, when you moved back to the farm.
Or shortly thereafter, because I remember when we lived in town that year. That was 8th and 9th grade. I'm not sure which. We had scarlet fever, Lincoln and I, and we had to be quarantined. over Christmas. And I remember at that time, it was at Christmas time, somebody from the church came and brought some Christmas goodies from the church program, and it seems to me there were some people that came and sang carols. But, of course, Mother was always alone with us all those years. Hal was working somewhere else then, and Blanche was in college.
What college?
She went to Des Moines University, which is no longer. So then I went to school, and after high school, there were about 4 from our graduating class of about 25. There were 25 in our graduating class, high school. There were 4 friends of us who were in the same little church, and we went to Des Moines University for our normal training, which was, it seems to me, it was only 6 weeks.
What do you mean by normal training?
Well, that was the way you trained to be a rural school teacher without going to college.
I see.
6 weeks, they called it normal training. Now, why, I don't know what that word normal
What
is.
church was it? What was it?
Their church?
What church was it?
Oh, it was a little Baptist church.
Okay.
Yes.
And so you went to
Des Moines University.
for 6
that.
weeks, you said?
I believe it was 6 weeks. It might have been a little longer. Maybe it was 8 weeks. I'm not sure. And we had our normal training. And I remember coming home during that time for the funeral of my uncle that had lived across the farm.
The Zinzers.
Yes, Uncle Jesse Zinser.
Your mother's side or your father's side?
It was my father's sister's husband. Aunt Tilly, you remember seeing Aunt Tilly in Fort Dodge? It was her husband. So she was left, of course her family was more grown than ours when she was left alone. But then after that fall, I started teaching a rural school of 13 to 15 pupils.
That was just out of high school.
Just out of high school.
And you were teaching what age levels?
Well, it was rural school, so you could have them from grades 1 through 8. And I think I had 6 grades.
So you were teaching some that were not that much younger than you.
Well, in a way, 8th grade.
Well, 8, but then there's
Yeah.
only a difference of 4 years.
That's right.
5 years from there and graduation.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
Yes. And having to go out in the wintertime, of course doing our own janitorial work. And then in the wintertime it would get so cold, and I was driving a little old car of some kind that you had to crank, driving that out to school. It was about, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 miles from home. But I decided I shouldn't do that during the winter because sometimes the car wouldn't start. So I stayed in a home and walked probably a half mile to school. And in that home, that bedroom was the coldest place I've ever been. I couldn't keep warm with all of the covers. The world. They just didn't heat the bedrooms. And,
So you had to live without any other family.
well, I was living with a family in their home.
Right. You
Yes.
were separated from your own family.
Oh yes, but I went home on weekends. And but what I remember about this was having to get up in the morning and walk down in the cold and start the fire, kindling, and
This is how you paid for your room and board partly?
no, that was part of the job of teaching for probably $50 a month. Coal, kindling. But during the coldest weather, we'd try to bank the fire so there would be some coals there in the morning when you came back to start it. And there had occasionally been, and there was somebody somebody was teaching whom I knew, whose schoolhouse had caught on fire during the night. And I think about that so often. I wondered, I'd be so glad to get out in the morning and see that school was still there. It was sort of a worry.
Were you the only teacher there?
Yes.
What other assistants did you have?
Well, no assistants.
Janitor?
No, I said we were our own custodians. Sweeping and cleaning and No broom.
Well, who administrated all the duties of purchasing supplies and all that kind of a thing?
Well, I suppose I had to get the supplies. We were chosen by a school board, a rural school board, district or whatever they called. And our materials we had a county superintendent who really was the overseer of all these rural schools in the county. And certainly we didn't ever saw her very much.
How many people would there have been in the school?
Pupils? From 13 to 15. It seems to me I had 13 most of the time.
Just a one-room schoolhouse?
Yes.
Very small, very simple.
Yes. Very simple. But it happened that I had about 6 little first graders. And the others, like one in a grade or whatever.
Which, the first year you taught?
Yes. I taught there only 1 year.
Oh.
And I really enjoyed them because I just found how you could see how children of that age, how fast they could go, how fast they could learn. And of course, you could see what they learned from week to week in their reading or writing or numbers or whatever.
What happened at that? Where was that school located?
In Wright County, Iowa.
Not in a town? Or
No.
Out in the,
Several miles from Goldfield.
was it amongst the farms?
Yes, but nothing very close. As I said, the place I stayed was perhaps a half mile or quarter mile from the school.
How big of a town was that? Where you stayed?
It was a home.
On a farm?
Yes, a farm home.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it was one of the, it was the family of one of my students there.
Well, how did you pay for? Was that part of your job? How did you pay for your room and board there?
Oh, I'd have to pay for it.
Oh, you would.
I don't remember what it was. Certainly it couldn't have been very much.
So after 1 year, what happened?
Then driving back and forth with the car, and I guess a time or two not being able to start the car or something, Hal actually decided, he said, it isn't worth it. You might as well go on and get your college and forget this. So, for that reason, I'm not sure whether I would have been permitted to go back to that school or not, because we had a new director. I guess that's what they called them. The director who was in charge when I got the job was very friendly and all. The new director had some rather incorrigible a couple of boys at school, and of course I disciplined them. I don't remember how now, but this didn't sit so well with the director, and so I just don't know whether I would have been able to go back to that school or not.
And so then you went to college?
Then I went to college.
Iowa University?
The first year I went to Wheaton College, probably influenced by a pastor that we had. This pastor later became, he married one of my cousins. And so I was at Wheaton for a year, quite lonely back there. First time I'd ever been away. I went there on a train.
How old were you then?
Well,
You graduated from high school?
yes,
Probably 17 or 18?
18 I think.
When you graduated?
I think so. So
A year at the rural school?
no, this is in Goldfield. I never went to a rural school
No, where you taught? You taught a year after you were...
after I got out of high school.
So that brought you up to 19.
Yes,
And then you must have been 19 or 20 when you went to Wheaton.
yes, I must have been. And I lived in what they called the Blanchard House back in Wheaton. Mrs. Blanchard was the widow of one of the early presidents of Wheaton. And it seemed as though most of the girls that were there in this house, or a number of them, were from the East and a little different.
more sophisticated or?
Well, in a way, yes. Probably had more money.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that maybe.
Uh-huh.
But they're very nice.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't maintain any real close friendships during the years because I was there only. Oh, and I stayed in this house for a few weeks or months, I don't recall. And then my tuition at a school like that was higher, of course, than it would have been at other places. And we were getting kind of crowded financially. And so I really needed to be working, but I hadn't found a job. And I remember praying one day that, I could, if I'd just get a job soon. Especially, I remember that. And the next morning, I was called in to ask me about a job. And I got that job, which was, do you recall?
Was this the baking of the bread?
Yes, baking the hot breads for breakfast. Which it wasn't so bad, and they seemed to like my work very well.
For that house there?
No, this is for the dormitory of the school.
So you had to.
And then I
in a house, though.
No, then I moved to the dormitory.
Oh.
And I don't know if they thought I was some kind of an influential person or what, but my roommate was a young girl in the academy, which is like a high school connected with and she was the kind of girl, and her folks had sent her there because she needed to be confined. And she was kind of a cute little girl. We got along all right, but
So you straightened her out, huh?
oh no, I have no idea what happened later. But my chief recollection of this was during the winters at some time they found steps leading up the fire escape in the snow, evidently looking in the dorm windows or something. And so when I'd come down there alone in the morning in the dark of the winter, I could just feel the eyes looking in at me.
Was this a threatening person or something? Were they worried about?
Well, there was some alarm about it.
Concern?
I think it was just window prowlers peeking or something like that. I don't know if they ever found.
How early did you have to get up?
About 5 o'clock.
And how much did you have to pay?
Well, this helped to pay for my room and board.
Oh, so did you have to make everything from scratch? I mean, did you get out your
Oh, yes.
package mixes that you got at Safeway?
No package mixes then. Cornbread and biscuits. But there was a lady who worked in the kitchen who was my overseer. I guess her name was Mrs. Cook. Imagine that.
Yeah.
But the overseer of the kitchen or dining room was Mrs. Stewart. But the lady in the kitchen was a fat, jolly lady, and she was, very helpful at breaking me in. I guess I would try to do some things the night before to get the pans ready or something.
How long would it take you to do that then? You get up at 5 or start working at 5?
I think I'd get up at 5 and have to be down there by 5:30.
When would you be done?
I don't remember the hours it'd be at breakfast time.
Any cleanup necessary?
I don't think I did the cleanup.
Just the baking?
I think so.
And it was bread every day of one sort or another?
Well, yes, like
Rolls?
rolls or cornbread, baking powder biscuits. I can't remember if they ever had pancakes or anything like
5 days a week?
that. Well, I suppose it was 7.
Okay.
I can't remember whether I had any time off or not
How long did you do this?
for the rest of the year
At Wheaton?
at Wheaton.
Okay. And so, following that, was it still a financial reason why you left? Mainly?
No. And then after the end of that year, Lincoln was ready to go to college. And he didn't want, he had in mind different courses. So it seemed his selection was Iowa University, State University of Iowa. And it didn't bother me to change particularly. Wheaton was a very conservative school, theologically. And sometimes I felt that when you live in that kind of environment, you're not always prepared to go out and live in the regular world. So, at the end of that year, in June, I guess after I got home from school, Hal and Edna were married. And then it was better after that. They were married in the Little Brown Church, that you've heard of, in Iowa. And so it was better. Then Lincoln and I were both going to Iowa University.
Pugsy's eating snail.
Oh, a snail?
Yes.
Oh, Pugsy.
Snail shell. Excuse me.
So Mother, then, we moved to Iowa City. Took Mother along. I mean, Mother went with us. And lived in a kind of a flat, a two-story.
Rented out the farm.
No. Then, you see, Hal and Edna were married. Hal was farming. So this left them alone on the farm, which was better. Back to the farming days. Hal and Edna, let's see, they were married in 1927, so they went together for 10 years before they were married. And I remember once that Mother went back to Illinois or Kansas, either one, for a family reunion. So Edna came out to the farm and stayed with me and helped with cooking for the men on the farm and so on. And that's when I actually learned to drive the car alone. That was a year after I'd had a year at college. Of course, traffic was very simple then. So one day I said, should we go out and should we drive by ourselves? And she's game for everything. And so we drove around a whole section, which would be about 4 miles by the time you got home, because I didn't want to stop to turn around anywhere. I was afraid I couldn't make it. So that's my first driving alone.
From Hal's farm?
Yes.
Well, your farm?
Yes. And this farm stayed in the family. I was owned by the family till Mother died. Well, then, after then.
And so you were then living in town, University of Iowa, while Lincoln was going to school there. You were living with your mother.
Yes.
And you were going to University of Iowa.
Yes, we both went
You
there.
were in your second year. He was in his first.
Right.
And those years, anything special?
Well, we stayed in this flat, two-story flat. It was kind of like row houses for a year, I believe. And during that year, Blanche had typhoid fever back in New York City. She was working in New York City. And so to recuperate after it was over, she came home and spent perhaps the summer months or something with us there in Iowa City. I remember that.
She had been recuperated then, or she was still
Well, she was at the end of her recuperation, I guess. And so then the next year, we moved to kind of a rooming house. There was a family in the church who was going to run this rooming house, a couple, and their two children. So Mother and Lincoln and I, plus another mother and her two children, that was, do you remember Dorothy McCoy? It was her mother and her brother. So the three families of us lived there in that big house, but the one family was running it.
The flat?
No, now this is the house, a big house where we moved to, and kept
still in Iowa City.
Iowa City, and kept male students. And of course, Lincoln and the boys, I think, all slept out on an outdoor sleeping porch during that time.
You rented this house? That's how it worked?
We rented a section of it, a part of it. And I believe that Mother and Mrs. McCoy did some things to help pay for our part.
Did you have any income from the farm?
Yes.
Your farm?
I believe so, yes. That's where Mother got her income. Although then we were approaching the Depression, so it was getting very rough. And while we were still there, Hal And Edna especially didn't like the farm. And so they didn't stay on the farm too long. And they went to, came out to California. That was the first they came out to California.
You went to school? Wasn't that the idea?
Not then.
No.
No. And they came out to California and lived in Calexico down near the border. Because I had an uncle living there. And sort of helped to get them a job, I guess. And Edna worked for a penny store. And I can't remember where Hal worked. But that was terribly hot and depressing there. So they didn't stay there too long. And then, the year I left IOU and went to teach in South English, Hal and Edna came back and lived in that same house for that year. And Hal started college.
At IOU?
At IOU, after he'd been out of high school 10 years. And he wasn't particularly agile student in high school. And so the rest of us thought, well, he'll never make it. But I learned afterwards, years later, Hal said to me, he said, you know, when I was going to high school and had the chores to do, we always kept some cows. He says, I was just tired. And so he enjoyed college.
But this was after you had graduated from IOU, because you said you started teaching.
Yes, I started teaching in the fall of 1930.
What kind of a school and where?
It was a small town in South English.
Where in relation to anything?
Oh, it would be southeast of Des Moines.
And what kind of a school? High school?
Well, I had music from the first grades up through high school. And I also got a real education in teaching. I had to teach some, English. I was prepared to teach English. But I wasn't prepared to teach U.S. history. But I had to because it was hard to get teachers then. And I started out teaching it. And I remember telling the students, I says, I'll have to learn right along with you.
I'm sure they appreciated that.
Yes. But I believe eventually they got a teacher and I didn't have to continue with that.
So you were English and music after that?
Yes.
Oh,
yes. Well, when I went to all the rest of my teaching years, I had to combine some English with my music teaching.
Yeah. But you were always good and enjoyed English, didn't you?
At what?
At English, you were always good at it. You enjoyed it.
Well, that was my minor, I guess,
Was it?
in college.
The major was your music.
Public school music, they called it.
Like me, music education.
Yes, they call it at that time public school music. Amounted the same thing.
And how long were you at South English?
I was at South English 4 years. And enjoyed it. I had kept some very good friends from those years, even as some few students.
Were you living with your mother at that time?
No. Then the first 2 years I taught, the first 2 years there, Mother lived with Hal and Edna in another house. They moved out to another house of their own. And so then I was out rooming with another teacher.
And what became of the farm?
We kept the farm, but during those years we were just very near to having to give it up.
Couldn't pay. Were you paying mortgage?
Taxes, you'd have to pay
But
taxes.
it was yours, you owned it. You didn't pay a mortgage on the farm.
I believe we were paying mortgage too. No. Yes, yes, we were.
When you sold the farm, was the mortgage paid? That's the first way.
Oh yes. Oh yes. That was cleared.
But anyway, Blanche was back in New York probably.
Yes.
Hal and Edna had moved to, Hal was studying university. And Lincoln was still at the University
Yes.
of Iowa.
That first year that I was in South English, he was.
And after 4 years, what happened?
After 4 years, I looked for greener pastures, and
More money.
yes, right.
Did you find it?
And then I moved up to Rudd. And When I left that school, there was an opening. It wasn't surely for my job. It wasn't for my job. But Hal was just out of college then, and he did his first teaching in South English. 1 year.
What course?
Business. And I guess he had to teach some other things with that. But he tackled things he didn't know much about. But he always seemed to make out very well. And then...
so you just missed him?
Yes, and then a year after that, he moved up to... I can't think of the name of the town where Blanche had taught for 2 years. I can't think of the name of that town now. Generally, I can. Anyway, moved up to up to Rudd, and that's where I met my fate. But not during those years. Your dad was living, and we were going to the same church there. So I knew him, sort of, not very well.
1935?
Right. 34. I went up there in 1934. That was up north part of the state. And that's where I started taking glee clubs, music groups to contests. That was...
what was the school?
Pardon?
What was the name of the school?
The Rudd Consolidated School. That was the first time I'd ever been in a consolidated school.
Meaning?
Meaning that buses went out and picked up students from other districts. So closing.
Your dad had gone to school?
Yes.
Yes, because he was mentioning that they would be bussed in from various...
That's right.
What? Farms?
Rural school areas.
Yeah.
And see, then the rural schools were beginning to close.
So you taught where Dad had gone to school?
That's right.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't connect that before.
That's where I met him.
At the school?
At church.
No, at the church. Yeah. What
Yes.
church was that?
Rudd Methodist Church.
Still standing today?
Oh, yes.
Is it?
Yes. We went back there a few years ago when we went back to his 50th high school reunion. Did he mention that?
No, he didn't.
And the reunion was held in that church. In the basement and
And how long did you teach there?
I taught 4 years there.
Were you living with your mother at that time?
Yes. She came with me. And we lived in a little house without the nice, I can't think what you call it, nice parts of life. We had no running water in the house. I think we had a kitchen pump in a room that adjoined the house, and no furnace. So I remember that Hal was always good to help us get located. Radcliffe, I'm sorry, that comes to me all of a sudden. That's where he taught and where Blanche had taught. Anyway, he came up to help us and to locate a stove, that we'd have to have a heating stove. I remember that occasion. In that little house we lived in, I had ordinarily, of course, I guess I grew up that way without the utilities in the farm. Never did we have electricity or running water on the farm. Of course, they got that in after we left sometime. And took it for granted that we took the snow and everything went with it. And that was one of these, I don't know if Dad mentioned that very bad winter that we had in Rudd, winter of 36, I believe. And we'd have a week at a time when we couldn't have school. And Mother and I'd have to shovel out a regular tunnel to get out our doorway. We walked through a wall of snow. And 4 of the teachers lived in a house where they had to keep house, and it was really rough for them, most of them, because they had lived better before they came. But starting the fires, and especially one of my friends who had lived in a city and was not used to anything like this at all. So after 4 years, it was time to move on again.
After 4 years in Rudd.
in Rudd.
This brings us up to about 39, 40.
38.
Okay, where did you move?
Then I moved to Garner.
Each time did you get a little more money?
Yes. Larger school.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Probably, well, maybe not in Rudd, but when the faculty got larger, there perhaps was a little less closeness to the faculty. Well, Ebony, you
Ebony wants to go inside.
getting ready to move?
Go inside.
So the two
Yep,
friends,
go inside.
oh, here.
Whoops. Huggy. No. So, anyway, time to move on, and you, what were you commenting about faculty getting larger?
Oh, when the faculty gets larger, the faculty gets closer as a group. I mean, less close as a group.
And that happened where?
Well, I would say in Garner. And yet, we had lots of faculty fun, too.
How big a school was Garner?
Oh, I forget how many over 100 in high school.
This was just a high school only.
No, this was the whole school, but it was two schools, two buildings. Elementary school is a block away from the high school, so I would have some classes in the high school building and some classes over the other.
But it was all Garner High School?
It was all Garner.
Garner
That-
Elementary, Garner High School?
Yes, that again was a consolidated school.
Uh-huh. How many were in the Rudd school?
I have no memory. We have to ask Dad that.
Okay. So how many years were you at Garner?
6 years.
Brings us up to...
I was ready to move on from Garner, though. In fact, I resigned after 4 years.
That was about 1942.
Well, okay, if that's right. Anyway.
Why
And
were you ready to resign?
well, I just felt as though I had finished there and wanted to do something else. And so that's the summer that I resigned. I took a little business training in Mason City, Iowa, where one of the former Rudd teachers was teaching that summer. So I took, I don't know if I was there 12 weeks or not, typing and a little accounting. And while I was there, one day I got a call from a Garner school board member. Would I consider coming back at a little higher salary, I guess? And I ultimately said no. But later on, I got another call, and they raised the salary a little bit more, and I finally decided, oh, maybe I better take it. Because at that time, not that I was the greatest teacher, but teachers were hard to come by then.
I'm sure you were good.
So then I went back for 2 more years. And then,
Brought up to about 1944.
yes, that during that last year, why, your dad came into the scene.
How had he found you? Because you were no longer...
No.
through a
He
friend,
was-
I think Dad said. Through a friend.
Yes,
Huh?
right.
Yeah.
Willis Walbom. He had been
So-
writing. Willis Walbom was his name. He had been writing to him, and
Where was he living?
I think he was in the service. And in fact, I think I had some letters from Willis. I mean, just as friendly.
It was a mutual friend. Sarah.
Yes, sort of. Although. So then one day I got a letter from your dad, and so we just started corresponding.
Dad was 30. He was 44. You were married, right?
Yes, right.
And he was born. So he was born in 14. So that'd be 30. He was 30.
He was 30 that year.
You were 37.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And so how did things happen that year, 1944? You resigned as a result of Dad? Right?
Yes.
Uh-huh. So how did you deal with the move at that point? What did you do next?
Well, I don't know exactly what you mean, but
Well, what were your plans?
well, after we resigned, one day I came home. It was in, I think it was in February. I had a letter from Dad. It was on a weekend, and we had weekend guests in our home. And I had a letter from Dad, and he said that he was coming to see me. And he didn't ask if I'd be there or anything. And by the time I got the letter, he was already on the way. So I had to let him come.
What were your feelings at the time?
Well, I was excited about it, but I couldn't understand it either. How he?
Sure, you were a little bit skeptical, I suppose.
Yeah.
What's up his sleeve or something?
Well, I think I had,
Uh-huh.
but I couldn't understand his coming without going to see if I'd be there. So then he was there that weekend. And that's when it happened.
Uh-huh. And that was February, you said?
I think it was.
And you were married?
Yes, of course. It was the 25th of February.
Oh, yes.
That's
Married in the 25th of June.
Right.
In Rudd?
In Garner.
In Garner.
Because that's where we were living.
Right. At what church?
At the Presbyterian Church.
Was your mother living with you at the time?
Yes.
And so, after you were married, then you packed up and moved to California, where Dad was
Right.
in business?
He was flying over the Pacific at that time.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
And your mother came along?
No.
No.
No, she never went to California with us. In fact, well, she wasn't with me the very first part of the year that I moved there. She was back in Dumont, New Jersey, with Lincoln Juanita. She went back with them, and we rented gave up our house in Rudd, I guess, and.
You didn't own it? House.
No, we didn't own it. No,
You just
we had rented
leased
the.
it or something?
Yes.
No.
And so then she came back. After I roomed and boarded in Garner the very first few months I was there. I think she came back before Christmas. And then we moved into a house.
You say roomed and boarded. You got your meals cooked
Yes,
for you there?
right.
That was common in those days?
Yes, for teachers to do that.
To find was it common though to find board where you roomed?
Oh, I'm not sure about that, because when I first went to South English, I was there 2 years before Mother joined me there. Teachers stayed in 2 or 3 different places, but we went to a lady's house for our lunch and dinner. Or did we take our lunch to school? At least we went there for dinner.
Anyway, when your mother came back from Dumont, where did you stay?
Then she joined me and we moved into a house in Garner. No. Now I'm getting confused.
Well, we were at the point where Dad had come. You were married.
Okay, let's
Did
go
you
back.
immediately move to California then?
Yes.
Okay, where was your mother at that point?
Then she went back to, I believe it was Geneva, New York, with Lincoln Juanita.
I see, when you moved to California.
Yes. Or Philadelphia. Maybe it was Philadelphia, because she lived with them in Philadelphia some. And she was there for, until we moved to... She spent a year with us in Fresno, in California. But until that time, that would have been 1948. Lincoln brought her out to California, and she spent a year with us in Fresno.
That's why I've never seen pictures
Yes.
of her.
But we had first lived, your dad and I had first lived in
Sacramento.
No. Yes, when we were first married, we lived in Sacramento.
And then you went to Ontario, Upland?
Upland, California.
Ontario area.
Yes.
Dad worked Ontario, I guess. You lived Upland.
Yes.
And then he went through this on the tape.
Yes.
And then, of course, you can talk about things that you were special that you remember in any of these places, but then you went to Fresno.
And then we moved
Dad
to
said was not a good job.
Yes, he didn't.
He said that was a
He didn't complain about it at the time, but he began to feel restless.
Work too many days and hours.
Yes,
No benefits.
right.
And then you moved.
And that's where were you born? Upland. Yes. And we moved to Fresno before you were a year old. I believe.
What were some of your feelings about picking up and starting a whole new lifestyle in California? Ready for it? Were you bored with what you were doing?
No.
Excited about the change? What were your feelings?
Well, I don't know. I'm pretty adjustable, and things like that don't seem to bother me. And
yeah, you've mentioned that before.
Have I?
Uh-huh.
Oh. So, I believe I guess I'm the kind of person that takes what comes.
You're lucky. Lucky to be that way.
It can help sometimes, I guess. So, it was interesting. It was quite a change. I remember one of the chief things I remember about being married seemed so strange not to have a 3-month vacation, like for both of us in the summertime. To go straight through the year working.
Because you were used to it as a teacher.
Yes.
And something you didn't talk about was your frequent interest in summer schools and taking classes.
Oh, yes.
You did that frequently, didn't you?
Yes, I enjoyed that.
Uh-huh. When you were in Iowa, of course.
Yes.
Were those free? Did you have to pay?
Oh, no, you had to pay, but it was reasonable in comparison. I went to USC in California one summer. That's when Hal was also going to USC.
That's why you were living in Iowa?
Yes. That's before I was married, of course.
Did you make any other out-of-state?
I went to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia when Lincoln was living there. In fact, my cousin Mildred went along with me, and we took classes there.
You were quite adventurous and brave, I would say.
Well, it was fun. It was, and I went to Iowa U while I was in South English. Went back there summer. One summer short course up in Minneapolis is for choral teachers, which was not a regular college, but a music school.
Did the addition of credits or whatever improve your salary?
No, I don't believe at that time. No. And
Hello, Dave. Hello. Came to feed Pugsy.
Oh, you did?
Just fed Ebony now.
Pugsy's looking for you, too.
There you go.
Uh-huh.
So you say it didn't? Because I think nowadays it does.
Yes, I'm sure it does. I don't think it did then. I probably had enough hours to get a master's, but I didn't relate them to that. I just took what I wanted to learn about.
Very interesting. One thing, a little anecdote I wanted you to refresh in my mind, something I remember you telling about was when, I don't know if you were there, I think you were, in a buggy with your mother, tipped over.
Oh, yes.
Little rut somewhere.
It wasn't a rut.
Tell me
Well,
when this was, where it was, and so forth.
This is a time before my father had died, so I was quite young. And of course we went anywhere. Mother had to drive a buggy to get anywhere in that time. So we'd been to town or someplace, I don't remember where, and we were driving home, and that was before cars were plentiful. And horses were frightened of cars then. And we had a particularly apprehensive horse, Molly. Molly was really a nervous horse, and she frightened us a number of times. Anyway, we were getting not too far from home when here's a car, we knew who it was. It was the Martin girls coming along in their car. And Molly was shied, and she was kind of do things all of a sudden. And I don't remember going out in the buggy, but all of a sudden I found myself lying kind of in the little grassy ditch outside the buggy. And she had just turned around as fast as she could, and I had flown out. And I guess it didn't hurt me.
Not for very long. You hadn't gone outside. Just long enough to not remember the being tipped over.
That's right. I don't know how. I don't suppose it was very long.
And did it hurt anyone?
I don't think it did.
Did the buggy stay upright? Well, you turned the buggy over, I guess.
I don't remember.
Uh-huh.
I don't believe it did. I think it just turned around and
Anybody else tipped out?
No, Mother seemed to be.
Just a little baby, huh?
Yeah. I wasn't a baby, but.
You were not 7.
No, I wasn't
You
7.
weren't even 7 as your father was alive.
But the only other thing I remember about it was Mother said, "Don't tell Papa about this." She didn't want to alarm him.
Maybe Papa would have thought Mama wasn't taking care of the child well enough, too.
Well, he would just be apprehensive about things. He didn't want anything to happen to anybody.
No, since he wasn't able to be in control.
No, that's right.
Okay, I'm going to, we've got some time left on the tape. I'm going to suggest some ideas that might make some memories come into your head. Think of yourself back on the farm as a student. Let's say you're 10 years old or thereabouts. Picture yourself in that situation now. You can see the house. You can see the inside of the house. Who is there? What do you see? What do you remember? Just in the rooms or outside? Or what miscellaneous thoughts come to your head?
Well, one of the things I think of was our first radio. Had some kind of a radio that you had to have earphones. So, and we only had one set of earphones, I guess, and only one person could listen at a time. Although sometimes we would divide the earphones. That's one thing I think about.
Was it quite soft? Hard to hear?
Oh, I would say full of static, maybe.
Did you have to string an antenna?
I don't remember that.
No. And didn't have much selection in stations, I don't suppose.
No, I don't suppose so.
You would probably have a station in town, or was it shortwave?
Oh, I don't believe it would be in town.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember that.
Do you remember anything that you heard on the radio?
Well, it seemed to me it was mostly music, and like to hear some of those bands and things like that.
What else do you see in the house?
I remember the other one thing I remember was that Blanche and I had the bedroom that the stovepipe went up through, and of course around it there was kind of a grate that had it was sort of decorative in a way, had little metal circles or things around it, and you could go over there and you could look down into the living room. And occasionally Blanche had a boyfriend, and of course we'd try to listen. Never heard anything, but but that was it was the warmest room in wintertime because the heat would right up those holes. That part I remember. I also remember a little bedroom when Lincoln and I were very small, and Blanche would always be the Santa Claus. This was after Papa was gone, and we'd have to stay up there on Christmas morning until Santa Claus was ready downstairs. And, we were kind of excited about that. I remember in another room, which at one time was, part of the time was a dining room, but it was a bedroom when Papa was sick, one of the downstairs rooms. And Lincoln and I were looking at some books. We had some bookshelves in there. And we were looking at something, and I did something that I was upset for some reason and was fussing or crying or something, and was going to blame him. And oh, he was so gentle and tender. He says, "Oh, I didn't mean to do it. I didn't mean to do that." I remember that. I think that my complaining was frightening him. Maybe that I was going to tell on him or something. I remember we had a round table, that in this last year's anyway, in the kitchen dining room, which was one big room. And another thing I remember is that on Friday nights, our job, Lincoln and my job, after we got home from school, was to fill the boiler, the washed boiler, sitting on the stove in the kitchen, so the water could be heating during the night, and that was our wash water. And we'd soak the white clothes in there overnight.
For your weekend wash?
For the washing. We did our washing on Saturdays then.
And it would be heating all night?
I believe so.
Coals would be the...
Yes, just leaving some coals, but then I suppose stoking it more in the morning.
But the interesting thing is that in many ways, early in your childhood, life was much more similar to life several centuries before. Much more similar to that than it is than it was 60 years later. Because technology has changed so drastically in a few years, and hadn't changed terribly drastically before 1900.
Technology, yes. I wouldn't say some of the other living would go back to several
In
centuries.
terms of electricity,
oh yes,
that you use,
yes,
the things that affect your getting around vehicles and things like that.
That's
things
right.
That really make for a lot of work.
Oh, we've seen a world change.
Yeah. Of course, Grandma, my parents, or your parents, probably saw it more in a more dramatic way. Or in a very dramatic way.
Yes, yes.
In the major changes of cars, telephone, television.
Of course, we saw cars come in.
Sure, right. And you saw telephone pretty much.
Yes, I can't remember when we didn't have a telephone.
No.
Yeah.
The TV, of course, you saw coming in.
Oh yes, that hasn't been so long ago.
No.
I thought you've really seen TV come in.
But I was only unable to.
Where did we have our first TV?
In Menlo Park.
Menlo Park.
It was that big Philco.
Oh yes.
Big Philco. For that. We had that in Mountain View. Remember they brought it. We had that for a good many years on that TV stand. That's still in the garage, I guess, now.
Oh yes. Yes, yes.
Crosshatched grating in the
That's
front.
right. So it's lots of things have happened in your day too.
And still are happening.
Yes, right.
With computer world and so forth.
That's right.
But that doesn't change. Those aren't as important, I don't think, in the important conveniences of life. They're the icing.
Blanche is having her sing with her, and Mother would kind of sing along with her. It was hard for her, and she tried.
You were quite close to your mother, weren't you? You had lived with her for many years.
Well, yes, so you knew each other very well.
The fact that she declined slowly was less of a shock to you, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah,
she
that's
did finally go, but I know that was quite a difficult time for you when she did go.
Pardon?
I know that was quite a difficult time for you when she went, because she was close to you. You were close to her.
Yes, yes. Although I would say we were not as close as some people. I mean, there was no problem, but as far as being
More
chummy.
private.
Yes, right.
But it was the only parents that you really knew.
That's right.
You didn't really know your father.
Oh,
that
that's
well.
right. And of course, Mother was very, very easy to live with.
They didn't talk too much about, your dad didn't talk too much about his mother, Mom, so,
Oh, well, she was a hard-working person, Well, my mother was a hard-working person, too.
You had to be to survive in those days.
Yes, that's right.
I think of Grandma occasionally when I go out to the garage. There's still one of her rugs on the...
Uh-huh.
And it kind of amazes me the fact that here is still a work grandmother that is serving a very basic function.
That's right.
And yet it long outlives her.
Yes, that's right. We still have one in the bathroom, you know.
Yeah.
And
in a way, I guess in a way, it seems to me it's almost a shame to be walking on it.
Yes, sort of sacred.
Yeah. Because what rugs are there going to be left that she has made?
That's right.
How many do you have?
I think that we have that one big one that she made. Or is that the one you have?
That's a pretty good sized one. It's like about okay.
Yes.
Really?
The physical hardships is something that we saw lessened. Mm-hmm.
When did you first direct church choirs in California?
In California, when I went to Menlo Park.
How did you work into that?
I think the way it actually really started out, they were having some kind of banquet, and I guess they had heard about what I had done or something and asked me to lead the singing. And so then not too long after that, I guess we lost our choir director, and then they asked if I would take that on.
You were organist and director?
For a little while, but the organ was just a little...
Electronic?
Yes.
Some sort.
Yes. It was hard to do very much with.
Yeah. But then in another sense, you weren't required to do much with it either.
No, that's right. That's right.
And so you were director there for how many years? As long as we were there in Menlo Park?
Yes. I didn't play the organ. No, I wasn't director. Yes, I was. Okay.
Shall we take a vote?
Yes, let's take a vote. No, the Plankenhorns came then. Do you happen to remember them?
I do. Lillian Plankenhorn.
Yes, and she was so great on the piano and organ too, I guess. So she came in that as the organist. And I was then just the choir director. So that's how that...
How did you work your way into the choir directing at First Baptist in Sunnyvale?
Okay, we were going to move to Sunnyvale, or we were going to move to Mountain View. And somebody, it seems to me it was Reverend Bottomiller. I can't remember how I might have known him before, I can't remember that. But he had heard by word of mouth somewhere. Oh, I know how. I think it came from Everett Carlson. I don't suppose you remember him. He was one of the people that helped to start the church in Menlo Park.
You were there when it was started?
No, not. No. But he was still there.
I see.
Kind of a wealthy person. And I believe it was he that passed the word along. And then...
were they in need of someone?
Yes.
In Sunnyvale?
So I got a call from the chairman of the music committee, I guess, Mr. Furtado.
Remember the name? I think I almost remember the face.
Do you? And so he asked if I would consider that. And of course, he hadn't. I don't think he'd seen me even, and I hadn't seen him. And I said, well, it depended on if that would be a good place for the family. If the family, it would depend on the family wanting to go there. So that's how that started. And that came about.
Did you enjoy that?
Yes, I enjoyed it.
How many years? How many
4 years.
Only 4 years?
That's right. So I've been out of that quite a long while.
Yeah.
It got to me a little bit because of the pressures of Easter and Christmas and oratorios and things with volunteer choir, you know.
And then, of course, what's his name? Choir organist director came in, and you felt that he wanted to be both.
Well,
Or Or was that...
I was the one that got him there, really. I mean, I found out about him.
You were trying to get yourself out, you mean?
No.
What did...
Yes, I felt at that time that he would be better qualified, I guess. And I felt that I was getting to the place where I wasn't sleeping very well during concert times for programs, and I thought, I felt as though he would be well qualified for that.
Were you doing organ and choir for 4 years?
Oh, no. No.
You were doing only choir?
I did play organ sometimes.
Who was doing organ?
We had several organists. You mean when I left, or...
Why didn't you ask me?
What'd you say? Why weren't you ready?
That must have been 1955 or 56.
55. Well, when I quit, it was 4 years later.
I remember the Hammond organ there, and I always had this itch. I wanted to play it.
You did?
But you needed your practice there, and it wasn't always that accessible to me.
Is that right?
I just remember having an itch to play that organ.
Oh, is that right?
But I remember having an itch to play any organ.
Oh, yes.
But
Well,
I remember you practicing the organ there in the gymnasium.
oh, yes.
I remember, yes, and I would have a few moments of time when you were through.
Oh,
And
is that right?
there was never enough time as far as I
Oh,
was concerned.
well, that's interesting. I'm glad you told me that.
Of course, I thought the Hammond organ was everything. That was
Sure.
That was as big as my world has ever been.
Well, it was a pretty big thing at that time, anyway.
I guess as far as
Organs,
organ,
yes.
There wasn't too much available.
Uh-huh.
I remember having to go up stairs to the stage to turn the lights on there,
Oh, yes.
and never thinking that was a temporary. I wasn't really old enough to realize that was only just temporary
Yes.
church.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. You did play the organ in the new...
Throughout high school.
Did you? How did you have to play it for several years
Well, I played
as organist?
in the evening.
Oh.
When
Oh.
I did.
Oh.
Yeah. They paid me for it.
Uh-huh.
It was $20 a month.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I can still remember Pastor Hallowell when I would substitute in the morning occasionally. He was very stern, and I thought he was rather severe. He didn't like a tempo. He was up there singing in front of the congregation during a service, and he would just kind of turn around and say, like this. He would try to direct me and go either slower or faster
He
or
did?
something. And I just thought it was impossible to please. Here I was thinking I was doing it correctly.
Yes.
He wants this, and what is right,
Oh.
I can't just speed this thing up while I'm playing it, I felt there was tension there.
Oh, you did?
But I always respected him, too.
Yes. Uh-huh.
But he probably thought I was a young one.
Yes.
Needed some
Yes.
guidance, which I probably did.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, I always wanted to be an organist. That has been one of my... always wanted to be. And Blanche was a good organist when she was going to college. She had a job at the organ there.
Using Goldfield?
Yes, sure. At the college.
Uh-huh.
And I always wanted to be there because I thought an organ is so expressive. You could do so much with it.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But I've
It just never worked out that way.
no. I think I studied about 3 different times, but then always something.
You said you studied in Sacramento.
Yes.
Where else did you study?
I think I did a little bit in Mason City, Iowa. And but I couldn't have done that very much because I have had to go from Rudd in there on weekends. And then when I was at USC, I took organ that summer. That's what I remember now. Yes. It's an interesting life. Music is a very interesting life, I think, and I know you do too. So, well, what I started to say when I was talking about always wanting to do organ, it's been a great thing for me to see you do it. So into the picture comes
Can't get him.
Bugsy.
No, I can't get him. He's on the other side of the TV.
Oh, he is. Oh, Bugsy.
He had his day in the spotlight yesterday.
Bugsy. Hello,
Well,
Bugsy. Yes.
Anything else that you would like to document?
Well, I remember being pleased in Mountain View that you had some pupils too and were joining me in recital times. That was fun. You remember what I'm talking about, I guess. Back in Fresno when you were very little, I remember the time that the Nielsen three and the Dad's sister Beulah, and her two girls came up, and we were all together in there in that house, and what fun it was with the three little boys and the three little girls.
I remember the other day you were saying, I think the first time I heard you say it, that when you were taking care of three young sons, that now that you look back on it, you wonder if you've ever really recovered since then.
Ever got rested.
I'm sure that was, I've heard it said by others, I'm sure that was a very tiresome period. And you said that you had to feed the babies late at night. You would fall asleep practically with them in your arms.
That's right. That's when you twins are very little, before you had your early surgery.
Talk about that just a little bit. How old was Brad?
Well, Brad was less than a month old when he had the surgery. And we didn't think he was going to pull through.
Did the doctors feel the same way, or was that just...
They didn't say so. But afterwards, well, maybe during that time, Beulah said, who was a nurse, told Dad that he didn't think you were going to make it.
But that was not an uncommon problem, I'm led to believe.
No, I guess not too
Was
uncommon.
it just not diagnosed soon enough?
Perhaps so. I don't know. But as soon as that happened, you for a time there, you looked like a starving refugee. But as soon as you got that taken care of, you, as Dad says, you puffed right out.
I'll say, I've seen pictures. How long did it take before you recognized that there was a problem?
Well, I suppose that lasted for a week or two. We were having problems. At first, I think we probably thought it was the same as Roger had when he was little, and probably it was.
What was that?
Well, he would keep crying and doing so much crying, and he was hurting after. And I'm sure he must have had a little of the same. And then vomiting.
Roger was doing it too?
Oh, yes. Not as much as you.
Did you take him to the doctor?
Well, I'm sure we talked to the doctor about it.
It must not have been recognized at first.
No. I think they had us to get certain kind of food. But he just gradually outgrew it somehow.
I guess this was diagnosed for sure through X-ray? Did they tell through X-ray? Or was it through an exploratory thing?
I don't know. I remember that the doctor showed us a picture before the surgery, or afterwards maybe.
X-ray?
No, he drew a picture,
Oh.
just to show us what had happened.
Before the surgery?
I'm not sure the before or after.
I wonder how he was so certain how he knew this.
Perhaps just the way you were acting. It's possible there was X-ray. It doesn't seem like it. But I know they had X-ray then, as far as that goes, because you were X-rayed before you were born.
You were X-rayed?
Yes. Well, you too.
They don't allow that anymore.
They don't.
Well, they can use sonic technique.
Oh, yes, yeah, right.
But, well, years ago they didn't know that X-ray, they didn't understand the dangers of X-ray
Yes.
as much as they do now. I remember some teacher talking at Bay Valley Tech about the casual use of X-ray when you go downtown and you put your feet on one of these machines which would allow you to see your feet bones in your feet.
Yes.
Remember those?
Yeah, sort of.
And that was X-ray. And that was before they realized that certain excesses of X-ray could be proven to be dangerous to your health.
Mm-hmm.
And people would just go and do this casually and get as many X-rays as they wanted. So,
Well, I remember the doctor said that when he felt 2 heartbeats, he said, if you don't mind, I'm going to wait for the X-rays until till delivery time, because then I'll know in what position they are.
and so they knew it was twins before
Yes.
delivery
Uh-huh.
because of the X-ray.
Right. Well, he was sure but that it was before when he heard the 2 heartbeats.
First twins he had delivered.
Yes, right.
Yeah,
I didn't know that at the time.
I see. You would have been nervous.
I suppose I might have been. I don't know. He's a very nice doctor. And the surgeon, pardon?
Is he still around?
I don't know.
How old was he at the time?
Oh, I would just be guessing he was in perhaps in his early 40s or in his 40s maybe. But the doctor who did the surgery was a very nice doctor too. And we heard at the time when he died. And can you imagine, I believe that surgery cost $50.
That's the story of the times, isn't it?
I should
Hospital,
say. Uh-huh.
$50.
But $50 was $50 then.
Sure. It was probably more like
$200 probably, or maybe
at
more.
least, maybe more.
Of course, it would be much more than that now.
Dad said he was making a couple dollars in 1950 an hour.
Yeah.
$2 an hour.
Uh-huh.
So they talk about 20. So
Mm-hmm.
there's 10 times.
Oh, yes, right.
So $500 would be more likely
Oh, yes, I'm sure.
today.
Well, you couldn't go into a hospital for that.
No.
No.
No, that's true. Very true.
Mhm.
Mention the word surgery, and that's
That's right.
$1,000 already.
That's right.
And your mother came out to California permanently when?
She came out, I believe the same year we moved to Menlo Park. She came out when Hal and Edna, she came out with them.
And lived with them?
No, she didn't. She was still with Lincoln and Juanita then. She came out in I think it was, well, it was, Lincoln brought her out, I believe. I guess I'm getting a little confused
Well,
now.
she helped take care of Sandy anyway, didn't she?
Yes.
Your mother.
When she came out when they bought their motel. And Blanche came out at the same time. And it was Blanche and she who were really taking care of Sandra, while Hal and Edna were at the motel. Because they bought their house.
Did Hal and Edna have their house before they bought the motel?
I don't believe so.
Well, I guess that's the point I'm getting. Where did Hal get the money to buy a motel? Takes lots of, or at least you have to have good income to get a loan.
Yes, that's right.
How was he earning his money?
Well,
He didn't pay cash for it, did he?
he was teaching school.
Or was this after your mother had died? that he bought the
No,
house?
no.
How did he afford a motel?
I don't know. It must have been a big loan or something. And his credit was good somehow.
Boy, 'cause I don't think you could do it today.
Pardon?
I don't think it could be done today.
I don't believe so either. Well, it's just like buying a house today. Who can buy a house in certain areas?
And then your mother, when she came to California, was she showing any signs of her?
Oh, yes. In fact, when we lived in Garner was when I began to realize it. I'd be kind of impatient because she would forget certain things, forget to tell me somebody had called. And then suddenly I realized, well, she can't help this. And, of course, I didn't, at that time there was no talk of Alzheimer's. And, of course, it wasn't even commented on when she died. I don't know if she had that or not. But I'm sure it was starting.
Was she aware of it?
Yes, I think she came to realize because it embarrassed her.
Did she take these steps to, like, write notes or whatever?
I can't remember that, whether she did or not.
And
I did some note writing. I started writing notes more then, I guess.
would you equate it at all to the way Aunt Blanche has progressed?
I would guess so, probably.
It seems very similar.
I think so. Although Mother failed more physically.
In what way?
Well, she got thinner, and she was in bed, at the last. And of course, Blanche stays quite well physically.
And you said your mother died in her sleep?
I don't really know.
You don't remember?
This is what we heard. She, when she died, they tried to get Blanche, and Blanche was out of the house somewhere, had gone somewhere. So they got Hal. And that's when we lived in,
You were in
it seemed like,
Menlo Park, wasn't it?
yes,
Menlo Park.
yes, that's right. And so Hal called me before he'd even gotten a hold of Blanche. And Blanche always felt so bad about that. Wasn't her fault. I mean, it wasn't anything she could have done about it. And so I don't know if they ever really heard. I guess they did, but I can't remember.
Was she in a rest home?
Yes, she was in a...
At that point?
Yes.
For how
yes.
long had she been there, approximately? Less than
Well,
a
she
year?
was in 2 or 3 homes. In one home where she was, which I believe was the second home, Hal and Edna were very good to look in on her, and this is not very nice to mention on a tape, but we found that she had bed sores. And Hal says, no more of this, and right away.
They weren't turning her often.
Evidently
I
not.
know of those.
So they got into this other place.